Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku was bitten by a radioactive spider during the sports festival. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The air in the waiting room was cold, sterile, and tasted of old concrete and ozone. It was a purgatory of white walls and metal benches, designed for function over comfort. A place where aspiring heroes were meant to collect themselves before stepping into the roaring crucible of public opinion. For Izuku Midoriya, it felt less like a waiting room and more like a pressure cooker. He sat alone, hunched on the edge of a bench, his gaze fixed on the scarred knuckles of his right hand. The skin was a mottled patchwork of pale pinks and angry reds, a testament to his reckless, desperate fight in the cavalry battle. Each throb of his pulse was a dull, aching reminder of the cost of one for all. It was a power that flowed through him like a tidal wave through a house of cards, magnificent and utterly devastating. To use it was to break himself. To win, he had to break himself strategically. Todoroki-kun. The name echoed in his mind, a monolith of ice and fire. He had watched Shoto Todoroki's matches with the rapt, obsessive attention that defined him. The sheer scale of his quirk was terrifying. Instantaneous, overwhelming glaciers that could fill half the stadium in a heartbeat. There was no finesse in it, because none was needed. It was absolute power, wielded with a chilling, detached efficiency. His mind, a frantic engine of analysis, was already running its 100th simulation of the fight. Simulation 101, Todoroki leads with a massive ice wave, same as his opening move against Zero. My response? A 100% Delaware smash. I shatter the ice. I also shatter my index finger. He immediately follows with a targeted ice ramp to get above me. I need to counter. Another flick? Middle finger gone. He freezes the ground, trying to trap my feet. I jump. A flick from my thumb to propel me sideways. Thumb gone. 3 fingers, 3 attacks, and I barely close the distance. He squeezed his eyes shut, a thin sheen of sweat beading on his forehead. It was a terrible, brutal arithmetic. He had a finite number of bones to break, and Todoroki had a seemingly infinite well of ice. All Might's voice, a constant source of strength and worry in his head, reminded him. You have to learn to control it, my boy. You can't keep relying on these suicidal attacks. Easy for him to say. All Might was a fortress built to contain a nuclear reactor. Izuku was a teacup. He pushed himself off the bench, the nervous energy too potent to be contained by sitting still. He began to pace the length of the small room, his worn red sneakers squeaking softly against the polished floor. The distant roar of the crowd was a constant, bassy rumble that vibrated through the soles of his feet, a reminder of the thousands of eyes that would soon be on him. The pressure was immense, not just to win, but to prove himself worthy. Worthy of All Might's faith, worthy of this incredible, borrowed power. The air in the room felt thick, suffocating. He needed to move, to find a space where he could breathe without the walls closing in. He pushed the door open and slipped out into the long, subterranean corridor that snaked beneath the stadium. It was quieter here, the crowd's roar muffled by layers of concrete and steel. The lighting was dimmer, cast by fluorescent tubes that hummed with a low, monotonous drone. Pipes of varying sizes snaked along the ceiling and walls, hissing and gurgling with the secret lifeblood of the massive facility. This was better. The long, straight path gave his anxiety an outlet. He walked, focusing on the rhythm of his own footsteps, trying to calm the frantic hummingbird pulse in his chest. His right hand throbbed, and he cradled it against his stomach, flexing the fingers that were still whole. There has to be another way, he thought, his mind circling back to the problem of Todoroki. I can't just trade a finger for every attack. I'll run out. Maybe if I can get in close. His ice is powerful at a distance, but up close, his movements might be slower. He relies on overwhelming force, not technique. If I can dodge the initial wave and close the distance. He was so lost in his strategic labyrinth that he barely noticed the small, dark shape scuttling along a thick electrical conduit on the wall. He stopped near a junction box, leaning his shoulder against the cool concrete, his head bowed in concentration. It's still too risky. His eyes can erupt from anywhere around him. One wrong step and my leg is encased. Then it's over. I need something he won't expect, something that changes the dynamic of the fight entirely. He sighed, a long, shaky exhalation, and ran his good hand through his unruly green hair. The weight of it all was crushing. He felt a desperate, childish urge to just call All Might and ask him what to do, but he knew he couldn't. This was his fight. His path. That's when he felt it. A sharp, piercing sting on the back of his right hand, the one he was cradling. It was hotter and more intense than a mosquito bite, more like a wasp sting, a sudden injection of pure, liquid fire. Youch! He yelped, pulling his hand back as if it had been burned. Clinging to the scarred skin between his thumb and index finger was a spider. But it was unlike any spider he had ever seen. It wasn't large, no bigger than his thumbnail, but it was breathtakingly, unnaturally vibrant. Its body was an iridescent black, shimmering with oily rainbows of purple and green under the dim fluorescent light. Its legs were spindly and sharp, and on the bulbous abdomen was a strange, intricate marking. It wasn't a natural pattern. It looked almost like a stylized helix, a tiny, perfect symbol of genetic code, glowing with a faint, bioluminescent blue. His reaction was pure, unthinking instinct. He slapped at it with his left hand, a sharp crack echoing in the quiet corridor. He felt a disgusting, wet crunch against his palm. When he pulled his hand away, the creature was a ruined smear of black and iridescent fluid on the back of his other hand. He stared at it for a second, his nose wrinkling in disgust. He quickly wiped the remains off on the leg of his gym pants. The spot where it had bitten him was already turning an angry red, a raised whelp forming in the center. A strange, radiating warmth began to spread from the bite, not painful, but deeply unsettling. It felt like a drop of hot ink spreading through water, a creeping heat that was already seeping into his veins. Weird bug, he mumbled to himself, rubbing the spot. His hero analyst brain, ever present, tried to categorize it. Some kind of exotic species? Maybe it hitched a ride on one of the international press members? Or... His eyes flickered up at the complex web of pipes and conduits above him. Yui was a massive, high-tech campus. Who knew what kinds of experiments went on in its myriad labs? He shook his head, dismissing it. He had bigger things to worry about. A weird bug bite was the least of his problems. He had a living glacier to face in less than 10 minutes. The warmth was probably just his blood rushing to the surface. Nothing to worry about. He started pacing again, trying to force his mind back onto the fight, but the spreading warmth was a persistent distraction. It had reached his wrist now, a tingling, electric heat that felt profoundly alien. A wave of dizziness washed over him, and he stumbled, placing a hand against the concrete wall to steady himself. The world seemed to shimmer at the edges for a moment, the humming of the lights above him growing louder, more insistent. Okay, that's not normal, he thought, a flicker of genuine concern cutting through his pre-fight anxiety. Maybe it was venomous? Should I go to Recovery Girl? No, I can't. Not now. They'd pull me from the match. I just need to power through it. It's probably nothing. Hey! My baby! Come back here, you little reprobate! A voice, loud and startlingly close, snapped him out of his reverie. A figure in a grimy, oil-stained jumpsuit shot past him, a wild mane of pink hair trailing behind her like a comet's tail. Goggles with strange, multi-lensed optics were pushed up on her forehead. May Hatsum. She skidded to a halt a few feet down the corridor, her eyes, magnified by her strange eyewear, zeroing in on something near the floor. Izuku followed her gaze and saw a small, metallic device, about the size of his fist, scuttling along the base of the wall on 6 spindly, articulated legs. It looked eerily like a mechanical insect. There you are, baby 3-7! Hatsum cackled, lunging for it. The drone spider nimbly dodged her grasp and scurried up the wall with an audible skitter of metal on concrete. Hatsum groaned in frustration, placing her hands on her hips. Honestly, the tracking software on this batch is a nightmare. Too much focus on independent locomotion, not enough on recall commands. She finally seemed to notice Izuku standing there, staring. Her magnified eyes swiveled to him, a predatory gleam in them. Hey! You're that guy from Class 1A. The one who blew himself up in the first round. Your strategic use of self-mutilation was fascinating, utterly impractical from an equipment standpoint, but a goldmine of data on bodily tolerance thresholds. Her words came out in a breathless, high-speed torrent. Say, you look like you could use some upgrades. I've got some pneumatic bracers that could reinforce your arm bones. Might reduce shattering by, a good 12%. Interested? Izuku blinked, overwhelmed by her sheer energy. No, I'm okay, Hatsum-san. Thanks. She shrugged, her attention already drifting back to her rogue invention, which was now attempting to pry open a ventilation grate. Suit yourself? Power Loader is going to have my head if I lose another one. He said my biomimicry drones weren't stable enough for festival grounds. Can you believe the nerve? She scoffed, gesturing wildly at the drone. Look at that perfect wall scaling. That's peak engineering. She paused, a thoughtful finger tapping her chin. And it's not like I'm the only one with containment issues. You should see the state of the bioengineering labs. Dr. Arasugawa is losing his mind. Ever since that funding grant for quark-spliced organisms came through, his entire wing has been on lockdown. One of his assistants said they had a security breach last week. Something about a batch of, what did she call them? Symbiotic arachnids. Little escape artists, she said. Apparently, they were designed to test cellular reinforcement capabilities. Izuku's blood ran cold. He unconsciously rubbed the back of his hand, where the bite was now a throbbing, purple-red blotch. Symbiotic arachnids. Cellular reinforcement. Escape artists. The words clicked into place with horrifying clarity. Hatsum, oblivious to his internal crisis, finally managed to scale the wall and snatch her drone. She held it up triumphantly. Gotcha! Back in your cage, my pretty! She gave Izuku a blinding, grease-stained grin. Well, good luck with your match. Try not to lose too many limbs. It's inefficient. And with that, she was gone, her footsteps echoing down the corridor, leaving Izuku alone in the humming silence. He stared at the spot on the wall where the drone had been, his mind reeling. He looked down at his hand. The skin around the bite was darkening, and he could almost see faint, web-like lines of a deeper purple spreading out from the center, like lightning captured under his skin. The warmth was no longer just in his arm. It was a fever, a systemic fire that was now coursing through his entire body. The dizziness returned, stronger this time, and the corridor seemed to subtly warp, the floor tilting like the deck of a ship. No. It can't be, he thought, his panic rising into a full-blown torrent. It's a coincidence. It has to be. I don't have time for this. I have to fight. Just focus on the fight. He stumbled back towards his waiting room, his body feeling both heavy and strangely light at the same time. He felt wrong. Every nerve ending was firing at once. The gentle hum of the lights was now a piercing shriek in his ears. The subtle scent of concrete and dust was an overwhelming sensory assault. He could feel the faint vibrations of footsteps from the floor above, could hear the distant, muffled commentary from Present Mike, as if it were being whispered directly into his ear. His world, which he had always perceived as a solid, reliable thing, was dissolving into an overwhelming flood of raw data. He collapsed onto the bench in the waiting room, his head in his hands. He took a deep, shuddering breath, trying to force the world to be still. His heart was hammering against his ribs, a frantic, syncopated rhythm that was completely out of sync with his breathing. The fever was intensifying, sending waves of heat and chills through him. A knock on the door made him jump, every muscle in his body tensing at once. The sound was like a gunshot in the small room. Midoriya? You in there? It was Uraraka's voice, sounding impossibly loud and concerned. They'll be calling for you any second. Are you okay? You look a little pale. She and Ida were standing in the doorway, their faces etched with worry. He had to force himself to look up, to arrange his features into a semblance of a smile. It felt like trying to bend steel with his bare hands. Why yeah. I'm fine, Uraraka-san, he stammered, his own voice sounding distant and strange. Just getting in the zone. You know, pre-fight jitters. Totally normal. Ida chopped the air with his hand, his brow furrowed. While a certain level of anticipatory anxiety is to be expected, you do appear to be exhibiting symptoms of distress, Midoriya-kun. Are you certain you are fit to compete? Never better! He lied, pushing himself to his feet. The movement sent another wave of vertigo through him, and for a terrifying second, he felt his feet lift from the floor, a strange, tacky sensation on the soles of his shoes, as if they were coated in weak glue. He slammed them back down, hoping they hadn't noticed. They didn't seem to. Uraraka gave him a brilliant, encouraging smile. Okay. Well, we'll be cheering for you. Go get Deku. They left, and he was alone again with the shrieking lights and the thundering of his own heart. He looked at his hands. They were trembling violently, or rather, the world as seen through his eyes was trembling. Everything had a slight, vibrating halo around it. He clenched his fists, digging his nails into his palms. The pain was a grounding sensation, a single, sharp point of clarity in the sensory chaos. Focus. One for all. Todoroki. Win. That's all that matters. Whatever this is, it's just nerves. It's just adrenaline. He was lying to himself, and he knew it. Adrenaline didn't make you feel like your entire nervous system was being rewired by a malevolent electrician. It didn't make the air taste like static electricity, or the light feel like a physical weight on your skin. A voice, amplified to godly proportions, boomed through the building, shaking the very foundations of the corridor. And we're back, folks! Get ready for the second match of the second round. This is sure to be a clash of the titans. On one side, the walking Ice Age, the son of the number 2 hero Endeavor. From the hero course, it's Shoto Todoroki. The roar from the crowd was a physical force, a tidal wave of sound that washed over Izuku and made him stagger. It felt like a million voices screaming inside his skull. And his opponent! He's the comeback kid whose grit and guts blew us all away in the first round. Also from the hero course, give it up for Izuku Midoriya. This was it. Time was up. He put one foot in front of the other, a monumental effort of will. His body felt disconnected from his mind, a puppet with tangled strings. He walked down the short tunnel that led to the arena entrance. The darkness of the tunnel was a brief respite, but the light at the end was a blinding, brilliant square of white. With every step, the roar grew louder, the light grew brighter. He could feel the fever coursing through him, a raging inferno that was either going to consume him, or forge him into something new. His head was filled with a high-pitched, insistent buzzing, a sound like a million cicadas screaming a warning. He stepped out of the tunnel and into the light. The sheer sensory overload was staggering. The light of the afternoon sun was so bright it was painful, yet he could see with an impossible, hyperreal clarity. He could see the individual faces in the front rows of the massive stadium, each one a perfect, detailed portrait. He could see the slight imperfections in the concrete of the arena floor, the faint scratches left over from Cementos' repairs. He could see the microscopic ice crystals already forming in the air around Todoroki's right side, a shimmering, deadly aura. And Todoroki himself, he stood across the arena, his expression a mask of cold indifference. But Izuku could see the minute twitch of a muscle in his jaw, the slow, steady rhythm of his pulse in the vein on his neck. The world was no longer a blur of shapes and colors. It was an overwhelming, terrifying tapestry of infinite detail. The buzzing in his head intensified, coalescing into a single, sharp point of focus right at the base of his skull. It wasn't just noise anymore. It was an alarm, a primal, instinctual scream of danger, directed squarely at the boy standing opposite him. His body, acting on a command he hadn't given, settled into a low crouch, his muscles coiling like springs. His shattered, throbbing hand felt strangely numb, replaced by a low, powerful hum that seemed to resonate with the fever in his blood. He was sick. He was terrified. He was more keenly, frighteningly alive than he had ever been in his entire life. Present Mick's voice screamed from the heavens. Are you ready? Second round. Begin! Izuku didn't hear the last word. He only felt it, a vibration in the air that was instantly drowned out by the deafening, internal shriek that screamed one, simple, undeniable truth. The glacier is coming. The roar of the crowd was a physical entity, a beast of pure sound that pressed in on Izuku Midoriya from all sides. But inside his head, a sharper, more insistent noise was building, a high-frequency shriek that drowned out everything else. His senses, already scorched by the feverish aftermath of the spider bite, were now fixated on the boy across the arena. Shoto Todoroki stood as still as a statue, his presence a vortex of cold that seemed to warp the very air around him. The buzzing in Izuku's skull was a compass needle, and it was pointing directly at that impossible, terrifying cold. Todoroki saw Midoriya sink into a low, strange crouch, his body coiled tight like a cornered animal. His green hair was plastered to his forehead with sweat, and his eyes, usually wide with earnest determination, were frantic, darting around as if tracking invisible flies. "He's cracking under the pressure," Todoroki concluded, a flicker of disappointment passing through him. He had hoped for a better showing, a more convincing victory to display for his father. It didn't matter. He would end this quickly. He raised his right hand, and the temperature in the stadium plummeted. "Begin!" President Mick's voice was the starting pistol, but Izuku's body had already reacted to the silent alarm in his mind. The buzzing had crescendoed into a singular, piercing scream of pure, unadulterated danger. The world didn't just move fast, it snapped into a new frame. From Todoroki's right foot, a tidal wave of jagged, crystalline ice erupted from the ground, a glacier born in a heartbeat. It wasn't a single attack, it was a geological event, a mountain range of frozen fury surging across the arena floor, swallowing everything in its path. Izuku's mind, the one that meticulously planned and analyzed, was a step behind. It was still trying to process the sheer scale of the attack, still trying to calculate the force needed for a counterflick. But his body, hijacked by the fever and the spider's alien venom, was already moving. One for all, the sacred borrowed power, answered a call that was no longer entirely his own. It flooded his right arm, a torrent of green lightning, but it felt different. The power felt less like a raging river breaking its banks and more like a directed current, guided by the insistent shriek in his head. He didn't think. He acted. His index finger, already scarred from the cavalry battle, pointed forward. He flicked. Delaware smash! The cannon crack of displaced air was deafening. A shockwave of pure force, focused to a razor's edge, tore through the atmosphere. It met the charging glacier head-on. The impact was apocalyptic. For a heart-stopping moment, the two forces battled for supremacy, unstoppable force versus immovable object. Then, the ice shattered. A massive cloud of ice dust and freezing mist exploded outwards, obscuring the entire arena. The crowd roared its approval, blinded to the cost of the spectacle. Inside the freezing cloud, Izuku gasped, clutching his right hand. The pain was familiar, a white-hot agony that screamed up his arm. His index finger was a ruin, bent at an obscene angle, a swollen, purple mess. But through the pain, he noticed something new. The shattering shock that usually radiated through his entire arm, the feeling of his very skeleton trying to tear itself apart, was muted. It was still excruciating, but it felt contained, as if some invisible reinforcement was holding the rest of his arm together. The fever spiked, and the throbbing in his hand seemed to pulse in time with the buzzing in his skull. The mist began to clear. Todoroki stood on the far side, his expression unchanged, a wall of ice behind him protecting him from the blowback. He looked at Izuku's broken finger, then at his face. "You're a real masochist, aren't you?" Todoroki's voice was flat, devoid of emotion. "But that won't be enough to stop me." Before Izuku could even formulate a response, Todoroki stomped his foot again. This time, the attack wasn't a wave. It was a spear. A thick, cruel shard of ice, the size of a telephone pole, shot from the ground at a shallow angle, aimed directly at his center mass. Izuku's plan had been to use another finger, to keep trading bone for time. But the buzzing in his head had other ideas. It spiked again, not with the broad alarm of before, but with a targeted, directional shriek that felt like it was physically piercing the left side of his skull. It wasn't a warning about the massive spear. His eyes could see that. This was different. It was smaller. Faster. While his eyes were locked on the main threat, a second, much smaller projectile, a dagger of razor-sharp ice, had broken off from the main spear, hidden in its trajectory. It was flying not at his chest, but directly at his head. A kill shot. Or at least, a match-ending one. There was no time to think, no time to plan, no time to even flick a finger. The alarm in his head was absolute, a primal command, move. Now, and his body obeyed. It was a moment of complete and utter dissociation. Izuku felt himself become a passenger in his own flesh. His spine bent backwards at an impossible angle, his body curving like a drawn bow until his head was nearly touching the ground behind him. His legs shifted with a fluid, unnatural grace, anchoring him to the spot. It wasn't a dodge. It was a contortion, a movement that defied the normal limitations of the human skeletal structure. The massive ice spear rocketed past, inches above his arched chest, the sheer cold of it burning his skin. At the exact same moment, the hidden ice dagger whistled through the space where his face had been a fraction of a second before, shattering against the concrete wall far behind him. The world seemed to slow down. From his inverted perspective, he saw Todoroki's eyes widen, just for a second. The mask of cold indifference slipped, replaced by a flicker of genuine, startled confusion. He had aimed that shot. He never missed. As quickly as it had taken over, the alien instinct released him. Izuku's muscles uncoiled, and he snapped upright, stumbling forward, his heart hammering against his ribs not from exertion, but from sheer, bone-deep terror. What was that? The thought screamed in his mind. How did I do that? My body, it moved on its own. I didn't tell it to do that. He looked down at his hands, then at his legs, as if they belonged to a stranger. He was breathing in ragged, panicked gasps. The fever was a raging bonfire now, and the world was shimmering at the edges, slick and unstable. Todoroki recovered his composure, but his next attack was laced with a new, subtle frustration. He saw Midoriya's confusion and terror and mistook it for a sign of weakness, a fluke. He unleashed another massive ice wave, this one even bigger than the first, designed to not just stop him, but to engulf him, to end the fight by pushing him out of the ring. The internal alarm blared, but this time Izuku's conscious mind fought back. He had to stick to the plan. He raised his left hand, readying his middle finger. One more flick. Just one more. But the ice was too fast, the wave too wide. The impact wasn't a sharp blow but a crushing, kinetic transfer of force. It was like being hit by a speeding truck made of solid winter. It threw him backwards, his feet leaving the ground, his body a ragdoll hurtling through the air. He flew a good 30 feet, the wind screaming past his ears. He braced for the inevitable, agonizing impact against the stadium's outer wall. This was it. Hitting concrete at this speed, even if it didn't knock him out, the damage would be severe. He slammed into the wall, back first. The impact was brutal. The air was driven from his lungs in a painful whoosh. He felt the jarring shock reverberate through his spine. The crowd let out a collective gasp. All Might, watching from the stands, leaped to his feet, his mind screaming, "Young Midoriya!" But Izuku didn't slide down. For one horrifying, silent second, he was simply there, pinned to the vertical concrete wall as if by invisible nails. A strange, powerful, tacky sensation bloomed across his back, the palms of his hands which had flown up to brace himself, and the soles of his worn red sneakers. He was stuck. His mind, already reeling, completely short-circuited. The world was upside down, his senses were screaming, his body was moving on its own, and now he was defying gravity. He looked down, or rather, up from his pinned position, and saw the shocked faces in the crowd. He saw Todoroki, frozen mid-stride, staring at him with an expression that was no longer confusion, but utter disbelief. The moment broke. With a conscious, panicked effort, Izuku pushed. His body peeled away from the wall with a soft, ripping sound, like old tape being pulled from a surface. He dropped the last 5 feet, landing on the ground in a clumsy, sprawling heap. He scrambled to his feet, his mind a maelstrom of terror and adrenaline. He slapped his hands together, then looked at his palms. Nothing. No sticky residue. No webbing. No clue. It was just him. "What is your quirk?" Todoroki's voice cut through the chaos in Izuku's head. It was the first time he had shown any real curiosity. "That's not just super strength." Izuku didn't have an answer. He didn't even have a coherent thought. The spider. The bite. Hatsum's words about symbiotic arachnids and cellular reinforcement. It wasn't a coincidence. It was happening, right now. A new power, an unknown quirk, was violently rewriting his biology in the middle of a nationally televised tournament. He had no time to process it. Todoroki, his patience finally exhausted, sent another attack, a creeping floor of ice that raced towards Izuku's feet, trying to immobilize him. This time, when the alarm in his head screamed, Izuku didn't fight it. He surrendered to the instinct. His body, now a strange and terrifying partner in this dance, reacted with a speed and agility he had never known. He leaped, not with the explosive, bone-jarring force of One for All, but with a taut, coiled springiness. He landed on the very edge of the creeping ice, his feet skidding for a moment before his sneakers seemed to find an impossible purchase on the slick surface. The fight transformed. It was no longer a static exchange of brute force. It became a desperate, high-speed chase. Todoroki, anchored in the center of his ever-expanding winter wonderland, became a turret of ice, launching relentless barrages of spikes, walls, and waves. Izuku, guided by the shrieking symphony in his skull and propelled by his new, terrifying agility, became an impossible target. He was a blur of green and black, a phantom darting across a landscape of white. The spider sense was a perfect defense, an early warning system that told him not just where the attacks were, but where they were going to be. He dodged, he weaved, he slid under massive blocks of ice and leaped over jagged frozen walls. But dodging wasn't enough. He couldn't win if he just ran. He still had to break the ice. He had to get close, and so he began to synthesize. He used the spider sense to anticipate, the newfound agility to position himself, and the raw, brutal power of One for All as his weapon. He flicked with his already broken index finger, the pain a distant, throbbing echo. A lesser shockwave, but enough to punch a hole in an advancing wall. He flicked with his middle finger, shattering a prison of ice that nearly encased him. The bone snapped, but his arm held. He flicked with his ring finger. Another crack, another explosion of frozen shrapnel. He was a whirlwind of controlled destruction, his mind finally catching up to his body's instincts. The fever was no longer just a sickness, it was fuel. The spider venom was no longer just a poison, it was a catalyst, a biological scaffolding that was allowing him, for the first time, to wield a fraction of One for All without completely disintegrating. His body was holding together, just barely, reinforced by a power he didn't understand. Todoroki was becoming more and more agitated. His attacks were growing larger, more desperate. The right side of his body was now completely encased in a thick layer of frost, his movements becoming sluggish. Izuku saw it, the weakness he had theorized about. Todoroki was reaching his limit. Izuku, his left hand now a mangled wreck, saw his chance. He used his thumb for one last, powerful flick, creating a massive explosion of ice and mist right in front of Todoroki, a perfect smokescreen. Then he charged. He burst through the mist, his right arm, the one with the original bite, drawn back. He poured what was left of his strength, what was left of One for All, into it. The arm glowed with a furious, crimson light, the skin splitting under the strain. He saw Todoroki's face up close. He saw the desperation, the self-loathing, the reflection of a monster in his mismatched eyes. And he saw him trembling. Not from exertion. From the cold. From his own power. In that instant, the fight ceased to be about winning. It became about saving the lost, angry boy in front of him. Everyone's giving it their all! Izuku screamed, his voice raw with emotion and pain. To win and get closer to their dream. To become number one. And you're trying to win with just half your strength? You haven't put a single scratch on me yet, you know. He thrust his ruined left hand forward. Look at me, Todoroki-kun. I'm not standing here for nothing. He pulled his right arm back further, the power building to a critical mass. So come at me with everything you've got. Todoroki stared at him, his face a mask of conflict. Izuku's words, a mirror of his mother's from so long ago, broke through the icy walls he had built around his heart. I will reject him, Todoroki whispered, his voice trembling. Izuku's eyes widened. He saw the past, the present, the future, all warring in Todoroki's soul. And he knew what he had to say. The words came from a place deeper than strategy, a place of pure, heroic instinct. It's your power, isn't it? The dam broke. With a roar that was part rage, part grief, and part liberation, Shoto Todoroki's left side exploded in a torrential vortex of flame. The ice on his right side melted instantly, turning into a massive cloud of steam. The heat was immense, a physical presence that washed over the arena, a sun being born in the middle of the stadium. The crowd gasped, shielded their eyes. Endeavor, in the stands, roared in triumph. Izuku didn't flinch. He smiled. Todoroki, wreathed in a maelstrom of fire and ice, his face a portrait of beautiful, terrible power, prepared his final attack. Izuku did the same, channeling every last ounce of one for all into his already shattered right arm. The red veins of power pulsed alongside the faint, spiderweb pattern of purple that was still spreading from the bite on his hand. The two forces, the legacy of heroes and the venom of science, merged into one. They charged. Fire met lightning. The resulting explosion was blinding. A hurricane of hot and cold air erupted from the center of the arena, a concussive blast that shook the stadium to its foundations. Cementos and Midnight desperately threw up concrete walls and sleeping gas to contain the blast, but it was too powerful. Izuku felt 1,000 different kinds of pain at once. He felt his arm shatter into what felt like 100 pieces. He felt the skin being seared by the flames and flash frozen by the ice. He felt the incredible, crushing force of the impact lifting him off his feet and throwing him backwards once more. This should have been the end. The impact, combined with his catastrophic injuries, should have rendered him instantly unconscious, a broken puppet whose strings had been cut. But the spider's gift held on. His consciousness, flickering like a dying candle, refused to be extinguished. His eyes, miraculously, remained open. He was flying through the air, his body a ruin, but he was still aware. He saw the aftermath of their cataclysmic clash. He saw the mushroom cloud of steam and dust rising towards the sky. He saw the arena floor, a cratered, half-scorched, half-frozen wasteland. And he saw Todoroki. He was standing, just barely, on the edge of the blast crater. The left side of his shirt was burned away, his right side frozen solid. He was staring at his own left hand, the one that had just unleashed a torrent of flame, with an expression of such profound, earth-shattering shock and wonder that it struck Izuku to his very core. In that moment, he wasn't the son of Endeavor or a prodigy of ice. He was just a boy, looking at a part of himself he had thought was a curse, and seeing it for the first time as his own. Izuku had done it. He hadn't won the match, but he had won the fight that truly mattered. A faint, triumphant smile touched his lips, and then, finally, the pain, the fever, the venom, and the overwhelming, bone-deep exhaustion crashed down upon him. His vision fractured into 1,000 pieces. The last thing he saw was the bright blue sky above the broken stadium. Then, the world went black. Consciousness was not a light switch, but a rising tide of murky water. Izuku Midoriya was drowning in it, suspended in a disorienting abyss of sensation without context. There was no up or down, no before or after. There was only the now, and the now was a cacophony of pain, heat, and noise. His first awareness was of a sound, a steady, rhythmic beep, 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 that seemed to come from inside his own skull. It was a metronome marking the time of his suffering. Then came the feelings, a deep, profound ache that resonated in every bone of his body, a phantom memory of being shattered and torn apart. Layered over this was a searing, systemic heat, a fever that felt less like an illness and more like a forge, burning away impurities he never knew he had. He was floating in a sea of white. White sheets, white ceiling, white light filtering through his eyelids. The world was a bleached, overexposed photograph. Muffled voices drifted in and out of focus, distorted and warped as if spoken through water. Unprecedented. Cellular regeneration is off the charts. A normal boy would be in a full body cast for weeks. A woman's voice. Sharp, old, and laced with a professional bewilderment that cut through the fog. Pulses erratic, but strong. Frighteningly strong. Temperatures 40.2 Celsius. Should be inducing seizures, but his brain activity it's not chaotic, it's just accelerated, like a supercomputer running 1 billion calculations at once. There was a soft, cool touch on his forehead, a brief respite from the internal fire. He tried to open his eyes to speak, but his body was a leaden weight, an uncooperative vessel. The effort was monumental, and it only resulted in a low, pained groan that was swallowed by the sterile air. The voice returned, closer this time. There, dearie. You gave us all quite the scare. Just rest. I've healed the worst of it, but your body, it seems to be doing most of the work on its own. Peculiar, recovery girl. The name surfaced from the depths of his memory. He was in the UA infirmary. He was safe. But the feeling of safety was immediately drowned out by a fresh wave of sensory chaos. The steady beeping of the heart monitor sped up, a frantic counterpoint to the low, insistent buzzing that was a permanent fixture at the base of his skull now. It was the spider's alarm, now muted to a low-level hum, a constant stream of ambient information he couldn't decipher. It felt like listening to a dozen radio stations at once, all static and whispers, and beneath the buzz was something else. A deeper, more ancient hum. A feeling of immense, coiled power, a sleeping giant within his own blood. One for all. It felt different. It had always been a raging, uncontrollable inferno. Now, it felt like a contained star, still impossibly powerful, but held within a new, more resilient firmament. The two forces were oil and water, static and symphony. They coexisted within him, and their proximity was tearing his consciousness apart. He slipped from the murky awareness of the white room and plunged into the abyss of his own mind, into the heart of the fever. He was in a dream of impossible architecture. He stood in the center of a vast, cathedral-like space, but the pillars and arches were not made of stone. They were woven from shimmering, golden threads of light, a web of cosmic scale that stretched into an infinite, stardusted darkness. Each intersection of the web pulsed with a soft, rhythmic glow, like a living heart. He felt a profound, instinctual understanding of this place. It was a blueprint. His blueprint, his own DNA, rendered as a celestial tapestry. As he watched, a second force entered the cathedral. It was not a gentle light, but a bolt of raw, untamed lightning. It was green and black and red, a chaotic storm of pure energy that crashed against the golden web. This was one for all, a legacy of power that had been forced into a vessel never meant to contain it. The lightning struck the web, and the delicate threads groaned, threatening to snap. This was the pain he knew, the self-destruction, the breaking of bones. But then, something new happened. A presence, a consciousness, moved within the golden web. It was the spider. He couldn't see it, but he felt it, an ancient, alien intelligence, impossibly fast and precise. It moved not with malice, but with a terrifying, single-minded purpose, to build. As the lightning of One for All raged, the spider's golden threads began to move. They didn't fight the energy, they flowed with it, around it, through it. They began to weave a new pattern, reinforcing the existing structure, creating new connections, wrapping around the bolts of chaotic power, insulating them, containing them, giving them a stronger conduit to flow through. He was watching his own body being remade from the inside out. The spider wasn't just a guest, it was an architect, rebuilding the very foundations of his being to withstand the godlike power he now housed. The process was agonizing, a biological alchemy that felt like being torn apart and rewoven, molecule by molecule. The vision dissolved, and he was thrown into another. He was in a dark, empty room, a void. In front of him, 7 figures stood in a silent line. They were translucent, shimmering specters of light and shadow, their forms indistinct but their presence overwhelming. The vestiges of One for All. He had seen them before, in brief, fleeting flashes. Now they were solid, real, their collective gaze fixed upon him. A tall, gaunt man with wild, pale hair, the first user, stepped forward. His voice was not a sound, but a thought imprinted directly onto Izuku's mind. "What have you done, child? What is this other thing you have brought into our house?" The buzzing in Izuku's head intensified, and the spectral forms of the vestiges seemed to ripple, to distort, as if the spider's frequency was interfering with their own. A woman with a kind face and a dark costume, Nana Shimura, floated closer. Her presence was a comforting warmth. It is not a hostile presence. It is protective. It strengthens the vessel. I have never felt the legacy so stable. Another vestige, a burly man with goggles on his head, pointed a spectral finger at him. Stable? Or corrupted? This is an anomaly, a contamination of the sacred torch. The boy was chosen to be a vessel, not a hybrid. The figures began to argue, their thought voices overlapping into a chaotic, psychic roar. They flickered and faded as the spiders hum warred with their spiritual energy. Izuku felt like a battleground, a contested territory for forces beyond his comprehension. He wanted to scream, to tell them he didn't know, that he didn't ask for this, but he had no voice in this spectral court. He could only watch as the ghosts of his power debated the sanctity of his very soul. The dream shifted again, the fever pulling him deeper. He was a child again, small and powerless, standing in a vast, empty sports stadium. Across from him stood All Might, but not the smiling, confident hero. This was the skeletal, worried form of Toshinori Yagi, his sunken eyes filled with a profound, heartbreaking fear. "What have you done, young Midoriya?" Toshinori's voice echoed in the empty stadium, each word a hammered blow of disappointment. "I gave you a gift. A sacred trust. I gave you the chance to be a hero, and you threw it away for the bite of an insect. I didn't mean to," Dream Izuku cried, his voice small and pathetic. "Intentions don't matter when the results are catastrophic." All Might's form began to grow, his shadow stretching across the arena until it blotted out the sun. His voice boomed, no longer the gentle mentor, but an angry, judgmental god. "One for all is a legacy of sacrifice. Of singular, focused purpose. It cannot be shared. It cannot be diluted. You have tainted it. You have failed." The ground beneath Izuku's feet cracked and split open, turning into a spiderweb of deep, dark chasms. He fell, tumbling into an endless darkness, All Might's disappointed face the last thing he saw, his booming accusation the only thing he heard. "You are no longer worthy!" "No!" Izuku's eyes snapped open. The single word was a raw, desperate croak, torn from a throat that felt like it was lined with sandpaper. The world swam into focus, sharp and painfully clear. The steady, rhythmic beeping was still there, but it was just a machine next to his bed now, its green line moving in a steady, calm rhythm. The white ceiling had tiny, almost invisible water stains in the corners. The air smelled of antiseptic, clean linen, and the faint, coppery scent of his own blood. He was lying in a bed in the UA infirmary. The sun was streaming through a large window, casting long, afternoon shadows across the room. The fever was gone. The raging inferno had burned itself out, leaving behind not embers and ash, but a strange, clean warmth, a low-level hum of vibrant, thrumming energy that resonated in his very marrow. The deep, shattering ache in his bones was gone, replaced by a dull soreness, like the aftermath of the most intense workout of his life. He turned his head. Sitting in a chair by his bedside, in his skeletal form, was Toshinori Yagi. He looked exhausted, his already sunken eyes shadowed with worry. He had been asleep, his head resting on his hand, but Izuku's cry had startled him awake. "Young Midoriya?" Toshinori's voice was thick with sleep and concern. He sat up straight, his eyes scanning Izuku's face. "You're awake. How do you feel?" Izuku tried to answer, but his mouth was impossibly dry. He just managed a weak nod. Toshinori seemed to understand, quickly pouring a glass of water from a pitcher on the bedside table and helping him take a few, slow sips. The cool water was a blessing, a miracle. "Recovery girl said she said you were healing at an impossible rate," Toshinori said, his voice a low, hushed whisper. He gestured to Izuku's arms, which were resting on top of the thin white blanket. "Your arms, they were completely shattered. Both of them. Comminuted fractures in nearly every bone from your fingertips to your elbows." She said it should have taken at least a dozen of her kisses and weeks of physical therapy. "She healed you once, right after the match, and when she came back this morning to check on you, they were almost completely knit. The X-rays are medically inexplicable." Izuku looked down at his own hands. His right hand, the one that had taken the full force of his final smash, was wrapped in a light bandage, but he could flex his fingers underneath it. There was a dull ache, but not the screaming agony of shattered bone. His left hand, which he had systematically destroyed finger by finger, was completely bare. The skin was bruised a dozen shades of purple and green, but the bones felt whole. He made a fist. It was stiff, sore, but it was a fist. It was impossible. He felt a surge of something, not just relief, but a profound, humming vitality. He felt good. Better than good. He felt strong. Not the borrowed, destructive strength of one for all, but a deep, foundational strength, as if his entire body had been upgraded from wood and plaster to reinforced steel. I feel okay, Izuku whispered, his voice still raspy. He tried to sit up, to get a better look at himself, to properly face his mentor. He pushed himself up with his left hand, placing it on the metal guardrail of the hospital bed for leverage. And that's when it happened. There was no green lightning, no crimson glow of power. He wasn't trying to use one for all. He was just pushing himself up. But as he put his weight on the guardrail, he felt it give way under his palm as if it were made of soft clay. A low, groaning, metallic screech filled the silent room. Izuku and Tashinori both froze, their eyes locking on Izuku's hand. The thick, solid steel rail of the bed was bending, twisting, collapsing inward under the gentle, incidental pressure of his palm. He wasn't even straining. It was like pressing a finger into a stick of butter. Panic, cold and absolute, seized him. He snatched his hand back as if the metal were white-hot. He stared at his own palm, then at the mangled, twisted steel. It was bent into a perfect, concave curve where his hand had been. His heart, which had been beating steadily just a moment before, exploded into a frantic, terrified rhythm. The machine next to him began to beep wildly, a shrill, piercing alarm that echoed his own internal shrieking. No, that wasn't one for all. I didn't feel it. I didn't call on it. What was that? What's happening to me? Tashinori was on his feet in an instant, his face a mask of shock and alarm. He didn't look at the bed. He looked at Izuku, his gaze piercing, demanding. Young Midoriya, he said, his voice dangerously quiet. He quickly moved to the door, checked the hallway, and then locked it with a soft click. He pulled the blinds on the window closed, plunging the room into a dim, tense twilight. He turned back to Izuku, his skeletal frame seeming to loom over the bed. What happened? It wasn't a question. It was a command. The dam of Izuku's composure broke. The events of the last 24 hours, the bite, the fever, the fight, the impossible movements, the wall crawling, the dreams, and now this, all came crashing down on him. The words tumbled out of him in a frantic, panic torrent, a confession whispered in the dim, locked room. I don't know, All Might, I swear I don't know, he stammered, his voice cracking. Before the match, against Todoroki-kun, I was in the corridor underneath the stadium. I was trying to focus, and something bit me. On my hand, he held up his right hand, pointing to the spot on his scarred knuckles. It was a spider, but it was weird. It was black and shiny and it had this glowing blue thing on its back. I just swatted it. I didn't think it was anything, but then I started to feel sick. Dizzy. And hot, like I had a fever. Tashinori listened, his expression growing grimmer with every word. I ran into Hatsum-sen from the support course. Izuku continued, his words tripping over each other. She was chasing one of her inventions, and she was talking about the labs, about a security breach in the bioengineering wing. She said they were working on something called symbiotic arachnids, designed for cellular reinforcement. All Might, I think one of them escaped. I think one of them bit me. He took a ragged breath, the full, horrifying weight of his own words finally settling in. He looked at his hands, no longer seeing them as his own, but as alien things, capable of twisting steel without a thought. During the fight, I couldn't control my own body. It was moving on its own, dodging things I didn't even see coming. There was this buzzing in my head, like an alarm. And I stuck to the wall, All Might. When Todoroki-kun blasted me back, I hit the wall and I stuck to it. And now this. He gestured helplessly at the ruined bed frame. I wasn't using one for all. I know I wasn't. It was just strength, my strength. He finally looked up at his mentor, his eyes wide with a desperate, pleading terror. All Might, what's happening to me? For a long moment, Tashinori Yagi was completely silent. He stood as still as a statue, his mind, the mind of the world's greatest hero, the keeper of its most sacred secret, struggling to process the sheer, paradigm-shattering insanity of what he had just heard. He had prepared for so much. He had prepared for villains to target the boy. He had prepared for the public to scrutinize him. He had prepared for the immense difficulty of mastering one for all. He had contingencies for 1,000 different scenarios, 1,000 different threats. He had never, in his wildest, most feverish nightmares, prepared for this. A stray, genetically engineered spider. It was so random, so mundane, so utterly absurd that it broke through all of his carefully constructed plans. One for all was a legacy, a torch passed down through generations in a sacred, unbroken line. It was a singular, unique power, a quirk unlike any other. And now, into this carefully controlled equation, a completely unknown variable had been thrown, an unregistered, undocumented, and quite possibly illegal experimental power had forcibly merged with his successor. He finally moved, sinking back into the chair as if his own bones could no longer support him. He put his head in his hands, his knuckles white. "A symbiotic arachnid," he murmured, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. "Cellular reinforcement." His eyes flickered to Izuku's bruised but whole hands, then to the bent steel. It all made a terrible, logical kind of sense. The impossible healing, the newfound agility, the instinctual dodging, the superhuman base strength. The spider's venom, its very DNA, hadn't just poisoned him, it had bonded with him. It had remade him into a more suitable host for the very power that was trying to tear him apart. It was a miracle and a curse, wrapped into one. The secret, the burden that Toshinori had carried for decades and had only just passed on, had become infinitely heavier, infinitely more complex. It was no longer just about teaching a boy to control a borrowed quirk. It was about managing the volatile, unknown synthesis of two powers that were never meant to exist in the same body. One, a spiritual legacy of accumulated strength. The other, a product of cutting-edge, morally ambiguous science. All might? Izuku's voice was a small, trembling whisper. Toshinori looked up, and for the first time, Izuku saw not the invincible symbol of peace, not the wise mentor, but a man who was truly, deeply afraid. "Young Midoriya," he began, his voice strained. "We have to be more careful than ever before. If what you're saying is true, you don't just have one for all anymore. You have a second quirk." The words hung in the air, heavy and terrifying. In their society, you were born with one quirk, or you were born quirkless. The only known exceptions were the monstrous Nomu and the ultimate villain, all for one. "No one can know," Toshinori said, his voice regaining a sliver of its usual command. "Do you understand me, Izuku? No one. Not your classmates, not the teachers, not even your mother. The world is not ready for a hero with multiple quirks. The questions, the suspicion, organizations like the Hero Public Safety Commission would never leave you alone. You would be treated as a lab rat, a weapon, or a monster. Villains, if All for One ever learned of you, he would stop at nothing to possess you." The weight of his words settled onto Izuku's shoulders, a physical pressure that was heavier than any glacier Todoroki could have conjured. He had yearned for a quirk his entire life. Now he had two, and both were secrets that could get him killed, secrets that isolated him from everyone he cared about. He looked at his hands again, at the faint, web-like pattern of purple bruising that still lingered under the skin. He could feel it now, the two powers humming within him, a strange and volatile harmony. The roaring star of One for All, and the quiet, intricate, and terrifyingly strong web of the spider. He was no longer just the successor to the symbol of peace. He was something new. Something other. Something dangerous. The white room of the infirmary, once a place of healing and safety, now felt like the first day of a life sentence. He was trapped, not by walls or locks, but by the very power that was supposed to set him free. The metamorphosis was complete, but the boy who had walked into the arena was gone, and the hero who had emerged was a stranger, even to himself. The world outside the infirmary walls was a celebration. Yuri was abuzz with the fallout from the sports festival's most explosive match. News reports ran on a loop, dissecting the cratered arena, the unprecedented power display, and the dramatic, emotional breakthrough of Endeavor's son. Izuku Midoriya was the name on everyone's lips, the reckless, heroic boy with the self-destructive quirk who had sacrificed his own body to save his rival's soul. He was a hero in the making, a testament to the indomitable spirit UA championed. But the boy at the center of this storm felt like a fraud. Walking out of the infirmary and back to his quiet, empty home felt like crossing a border into a foreign country. His mother, Inko, had met him at the school gates, her face a heartbreaking mosaic of pride and terror. She had hugged him, her small frame trembling, her tears soaking the shoulder of his clean, spare uniform. She had fussed over his bandaged arm, her frantic questions a barrage of love and worry. "Oh, Izuku! Your arms! Are you sure you're all right? Recovery girl said you were fine, but that match! It was terrifying! But so brave! You were so brave, my baby!" He had smiled, a hollow, practiced thing that didn't reach his eyes. He let her lead him home, her gentle hand in his, and every ounce of his new, terrifying strength was focused on a single, agonizing task. Don't break her. Don't squeeze too hard. Don't let the monster under your skin show itself. The Midoriya apartment was a shrine to his childhood, a museum of a life that felt like it belonged to someone else. The walls were covered in his clumsy, youthful drawings of All Might. The shelves were crammed with hero memorabilia, each figure a testament to a simpler, more innocent dream. Now, it all felt like a mockery. He was living a secret far deeper and more dangerous than just the inheritance of one for all. He had lied to his mother, telling her he was just exhausted from the healing process, that he needed to sleep. She had accepted it, tucking him into his bed with a gentle kiss on his forehead, the same way she had when he was 6 years old and afraid of the dark. The moment she closed his bedroom door, the carefully constructed mask of the normal, injured boy crumbled. He was alone. Alone with the secrets. Alone with the changes. The first night was a voyage into a new and terrifying reality. He lay in his bed, the familiar All Might themed comforter pulled up to his chin, but sleep was a distant shore. His body was a live wire, humming with an energy that had nothing to do with One for All. It was a baseline vibrancy, a deep, cellular thrum that made the very idea of stillness feel alien. His senses were on fire. The gentle whir of the refrigerator in the kitchen was a grinding, industrial roar. The ticking of his All Might alarm clock was a sequence of percussive hammer blows. He could hear the faint, frantic heartbeat of a mouse skirting within the walls of the apartment building, 3 floors down. He could smell the lingering scent of the katsudan his mother had made for dinner, not as a pleasant aroma, but as a complex breakdown of its component molecules: salt, soy, fat, protein. It was too much. The world was screaming at him, a constant, overwhelming flood of raw data. The low-level hum of his spider sense was a part of this new symphony of chaos, a background static that occasionally spiked when a car backfired on the street outside or a neighbor slammed a door. He squeezed his eyes shut, trying to retreat into the darkness, but even that was different. In the pitch black of his room, he could still see. Not with his eyes, but with some other, nascent sense. He could perceive the shape of his room, the furniture, the posters on the wall, not as images, but as a faint, three-dimensional pressure map, a sense of where objects were in space relative to him. It was like a bat's sonar, a subtle, disorienting ghost sight. He threw the covers off, his skin feeling hypersensitive and clammy. The cool night air on his skin was a relief, but the energy thrumming through his veins demanded an outlet. He couldn't stay still. He felt caged, a panther in a closet. He sat up, swinging his legs over the side of the bed. He placed his bare feet on the cool wooden floor, and a strange, familiar sensation bloomed on the soles of his feet. The same faint, tacky feeling he'd experienced in the arena, in the waiting room. A subtle, powerful adhesion. Driven by a curiosity that was stronger than his fear, he pushed. He leaned his weight forward, placing his palms flat on the floor. He pressed down, and the tacky feeling intensified. He lifted his knees, his body moving into a low, 4-point crouch, all his weight on his hands and feet. He felt anchored, glued. He took a breath, his heart hammering. Okay, Midoriya. Let's see. Let's see what you are now. Slowly, tentatively, he began to move. He crawled forward a few inches, his hands and feet peeling off the floor with a soft, almost inaudible schloop, then reattaching with the next movement. He reached the wall next to his bed, a vertical, painted surface that had always represented an insurmountable barrier. Now, it felt like an invitation. He placed his right hand flat against the cool paint. He felt the adhesion take hold, a powerful, bioelectric force that seemed to emanate from his very cells. He shifted his weight onto it. It held. He placed his left hand higher, then his right foot, then his left. His body, with an eerie, instinctual grace he had never possessed, began to ascend the vertical plane. He was climbing his bedroom wall. He stopped halfway up, his body parallel to the floor, his breath caught in his throat. He looked down at his desk, his chair, his bed, all seen from a perspective that was fundamentally, reality-bendingly wrong. He was defying gravity, not with a quirk that pushed or pulled, but with a fundamental change to his own biology. He was a human insect. A giddy, terrifying laugh escaped his lips, a bubble of hysterical sound in the quiet room. He had spent his entire life dreaming of having a quirk, any quirk. He never, in his wildest fantasies, could have imagined this. He kept climbing. He reached the ceiling and, with a terrifying, exhilarating confidence, began to crawl across it, his body suspended upside down over his own life. He saw his All Might posters from above. He saw the neat stacks of his hero analysis notebooks. He saw the small, lonely world of Izuku Midoriya, the quirkless boy who wasn't quirkless anymore. He hung there for what felt like an hour, suspended between his past and his terrifying future, the blood rushing to his head. This was his new reality. This crawling secret. This was the power the spider had given him. The next few days, before classes at UE were scheduled to resume, were a blur of clandestine experimentation and frantic analysis. By day, he was the dutiful, recovering son, helping his mother with chores, a task now fraught with the constant peril of accidentally crushing the vacuum cleaner or tearing a door off its hinges, and pretending to rest. But by night, his bedroom became his laboratory. He pushed his physical limits in the dead of night, his movements silent and precise. He discovered the strength was not just in his arms. It was proportional, distributed through every fiber of his being. He found he could lift his bed with one hand, the heavy wooden frame and mattress feeling no heavier than a textbook. He did a one-fingered push-up on the ceiling, his body rigid as a board. He tested his agility, leaping from wall to wall in the cramped space, his body twisting and contorting in ways that would have been impossible before, landing silently on the ceiling like a gecko. The strength was the most dangerous part of his secret. It was insidious. It was his new baseline. He had to consciously hold back at all times, to remember how to be weak. Opening a jar of pickles for his mom became a delicate surgical procedure, requiring intense focus to avoid shattering the glass into 1,000 pieces. He lived in constant, low-level fear of a single, careless mistake that would expose everything. But the most revolutionary discovery came when he tried to use one for all. He waited until he was sure his mother was sound asleep, the sound of her gentle breathing a soft, steady rhythm he could now hear perfectly from his own room. He stood in the center of his floor, took a deep breath, and called upon the power. "Full calling," he whispered, the words feeling different in his mouth. He braced himself for the familiar, agonizing strain, the feeling of his body trying to tear itself apart under the pressure. But it didn't come. The green lightning still crackled to life, swirling around his limbs, but it was calmer. The furious, chaotic energy was still there, but it felt contained. He looked down at his skin. The angry red lines that usually appeared, marking the paths of the power that were overloading his system, were gone. He felt the power coursing through him, but instead of a flood threatening to burst a dam, it felt like a high-pressure current flowing through a newly reinforced conduit. Hatsum's words echoed in his mind. Cellular reinforcement, the spider's DNA, the symbiotic change, it had rebuilt him. It had created a biological scaffolding, a high-tensile web within his own tissues that made his body a more suitable vessel for one for all. He looked in the mirror, his eyes wide. The green lightning danced across his reflection. He focused, pushing the output. 5%, his previous limit, felt like nothing. As easy as breathing. He pushed further. 6%. 7%. 8%. At 8%, he felt a faint, familiar strain, a low-level ache in his muscles, but it wasn't pain. It was the pleasant burn of a good workout. There was no agony, no threat of snapping bones. He was holding it. He was controlling it. A single, joyous tear traced a path down his cheek. For the first time, One for All didn't feel like a borrowed, self-destructive curse. It felt like his power. The spider hadn't just given him a new set of abilities. It had given him the key to unlock the one he already had. The two powers weren't oil and water. They were symbiotic. His analytical mind, now subtly sharpened, supercharged by the changes in his brain chemistry, kicked into overdrive. The grief and terror of the past few days were momentarily burned away by the pure, incandescent joy of discovery and analysis. He dove for his desk, pulling out a brand new, crisp notebook. The cover of his last one read, "Hero Analysis for the Future Number 13. He took a pen, his hand moving with a new, steady precision, and wrote on the cover of the new one, "Hero Analysis for my quirk, S14. He flicked on his desk lamp and began to write, the pen flying across the page. He worked with a feverish intensity, the knowledge pouring out of him. He had to understand. He had to document. He had to control it. He divided the first page into sections. Power Set 1, One for All Alpha, Source, inherited from All Might. Nature, stockpiled energy, immense physical power output. Current status, full cowling output increased. Previously unstable at 5%. Now stable at 8% with minimal physical blowback. Appears to be synergistic with Power Set 2. The new biology provides a stronger vessel. Question, what is the new limit? 10%? 15%? Need to test in a controlled environment, Gamma Gym at UA? What are the long-term effects of this synergy on OFA itself? Does it change the power? Need to talk to All Might about this. He paused, chewing on the end of his pen. Then he started a new section. Power Set 2, Spider Quirk, tentative name, source, bite from genetically engineered spider, UA bioengineering lab escapee, nature, complete physiological change. Appears to grant abilities proportional to an arachnid. Documented abilities, 1. Superhuman strength, baseline significant increase in physical strength independent of OFA. Difficult to quantify. Estimate at least 10x normal human strength. Maybe more? Bending the steel bed frame was effortless. Danger, this is the hardest to conceal. Must maintain constant control. 2. Wall crawling / adhesion, ability to cling to any surface via hands and feet. Consciously controlled. Seems to be a form of bioelectric adhesion. Does it have a weight limit? Does the type of surface matter? Glass? Wet surfaces? Teflon? 3. Superhuman agility / reflexes. Body is capable of extreme contortion and acrobatic feats. Reflexes are dramatically enhanced, operating faster than conscious thought. This seems linked to ability 4. Spider sense, the buzzing in my head. A precognitive danger sense. It provides omnidirectional warnings of impending threats. It's not just a single alarm, it has direction, intensity. It allowed me to dodge Todoroki's attacks. It feels like a constant, low-level input of sensory data. Can I learn to interpret it better? Can I use it proactively, not just reactively? 5. Accelerated healing / enhanced durability. Healed from catastrophic, compound fractures in less than 24 hours. Body is significantly more resistant to impact and kinetic force. This is the cellular reinforcement Hatsum mentioned. It's the key to using OFA at higher percentages. 6. Heightened senses. All 5 senses are enhanced to a superhuman degree. Hearing, sight, especially in low light, smell. This is overwhelming and needs to be controlled. Need to practice sensory filtering to avoid overload. He filled pages, his mind racing. He drew diagrams of his own musculature, theorizing how the spider DNA had integrated itself. He wrote down questions, potential applications, and most importantly, the dangers. The danger of discovery. The danger of losing control. He looked at his list of documented abilities, a feeling of immense power and profound dread washing over him. It was an incredible arsenal. He felt like a one-man army, but as he reviewed the list, his analytical brain latched onto a glaring, almost comical omission. He had the proportional strength of a spider, the agility, the wall crawling, the danger sense. But there was one iconic, crucial ability that was missing. He looked at his wrists, turning them over under the lamplight. The skin was smooth, unblemished save for a few old scars. There were no spinnerets, no organic nozzles. He focused, trying to will it, trying to feel for some internal mechanism. Nothing. No webs. He whispered to the empty room. The realization was both a relief and a disappointment. The idea of shooting biological fluid from his own body was, frankly, a little gross. But from a heroic standpoint, it was a massive tactical disadvantage. The mobility, the capture potential, the non-lethal restraint options, all missing. For a moment, he felt stymied. And then, the mind of Izuku Midoriya, the obsessive, analytical, problem-solving mind that had filled 13 notebooks with hero data, kicked in, now amplified by the spider's gift. His thoughts became clearer, faster. Connections formed with lightning speed. If the body can't provide it, then the mind must. His eyes darted around his room, past the hero figures and posters, landing on the shelves overflowing with his analysis notebooks. They were filled with detailed schematics of Hiro's support gear, Aizawa-sensei's capture weapon, Shiro's tape dispensers, Aoyama's belt. He had spent years studying how heroes use technology to augment and control their quirks, and in a flash of brilliant, stunning clarity, a new plan formed. He couldn't produce organic webbing. Fine. He would do one better. He would invent it. The idea was audacious, arrogant, and utterly thrilling. He wasn't a support course student. He had no training in engineering. But he had the knowledge. He had studied the chemical compositions of various capture weapons, the physics of tensile strength, the mechanics of high-pressure projectile systems. And now, he had a mind that could process that information with a terrifying new efficiency. He flipped to a new page in his notebook and, at the top, wrote a new title, Project, Web Shooter. He began to sketch. His pen moved with a newfound confidence, the designs flowing from his mind to the page almost fully formed. He didn't just need to create webs, he needed a delivery system, something small, concealable, wrist-mounted. It needed to be durable enough to withstand the rigors of combat and the pressures of using OFA. It needed a trigger mechanism that wouldn't activate accidentally. He sketched out a design for a palm-mounted, double-tap trigger. Simple, elegant, efficient. Then came the fluid. The web itself. This was the real challenge. It needed to have the tensile strength of steel cable but be flexible and lightweight. It needed to be incredibly adhesive but also have a dissolvable agent so it wouldn't permanently gum up the city. He began scribbling down chemical formulas, pulling half-remembered facts from chemistry class and articles he'd read online about polymer science. Polysaccharides, synthetic proteins, solvents, pressure sealants. The list grew, a complex recipe for a substance that didn't exist. The final piece of the puzzle was resources. He was a high school student with a modest allowance. He couldn't afford military-grade components. He would have to improvise, scavenge, and build it himself. The next morning, he emptied his life savings, a shoebox filled with carefully saved yen meant for a limited edition Silver Age All Might figure, and went to the local hardware and electronics stores. He moved with a new purpose, a man on a secret, vital mission. He bought microtubing, industrial CO2 pressure cartridges used for bike tires, parts from old watches for the trigger mechanism, and an assortment of strange, viscous polymers from a specialty plastics store. He carried the heavy bags home with an ease that drew a few strange looks, forcing him to consciously slump and pretend to struggle under the weight. His room transformed from a hero shrine into a mad scientist's workshop. Every night, after his mother was asleep, he worked. He cleared his desk, laying out his tools and components under the harsh glare of his lamp. The work was intricate, requiring a level of dexterity he had never possessed before. But his new, spider-enhanced senses and steady hands made it possible. He could see the microscopic threads on the tiny screws. He could feel the precise moment a seal was perfectly set. He tinkered, he failed, he learned. His first attempt at a pressure nozzle exploded, spattering his wall with a weak, watery glue. He nearly soldered a component to his finger, only yanking his hand back at the last second thanks to a sharp spike from his spider sense warning him of the heat. He hid the evidence of his secret project every morning, stashing the components and his notebook under a loose floorboard beneath his bed. He lived a double life, a triple life. He was Izuku Midoriya, the recovering student. He was Deku, the successor to All Might. And in the secret, silent hours of the night, he was the inventor, the architect of his own new power. One night, nearly a week after the festival, he finally had a breakthrough. He had created a new web fluid formula, a milky white, viscous substance that solidified into a surprisingly strong, elastic strand upon contact with air. He loaded a small amount into his latest prototype, a clunky, oversized bracer made of scavenged metal and plastic that was strapped to his wrist with worn leather bands. It was ugly, but he thought it might be functional. He stood in the middle of his room, his heart pounding with a mixture of hope and trepidation. He aimed at the far wall, at a poster of All Might smiling down at him. He took a deep breath. He double-tapped the trigger on his palm. Thwip. The sound was soft, but incredibly satisfying. A thin, perfect, silvery white line of webbing shot across the room and stuck to All Might's face with a wet splat. It held. He tugged on the line. It was strong, incredibly strong. A huge, unrestrained grin split his face. It worked. It worked. In his excitement, he forgot about the recoil mechanism. He tapped the trigger again, but this time, the pressure valve jammed. The cartridge overloaded. With a loud FONP, the entire web fluid cartridge emptied itself in a massive, uncontrolled burst. A huge, sticky, white wad of webbing erupted from the shooter, splattering across his desk, his chair, his notebooks, and a good portion of the wall. It was a complete and utter mess. He was covered in goo. The prototype shooter was smoking faintly. He froze, listening for any sound from his mother's room. Silence. He let out a shaky breath of relief, staring at the absolute disaster that was once his desk, covered in the sticky, rapidly hardening evidence of his secret. Izuku Midoriya did the only thing he could. He started to laugh. It was a quiet, breathless, slightly hysterical laugh, but it was a real one. It was the laugh of a boy who had been given an impossible, terrifying, and wonderful secret, and was finally, beginning to make it his own. The road ahead was fraught with danger, lies, and the crushing weight of two legacies. But for the first time since the unsettling sting, he didn't just feel fear. He felt a spark of pure, unadulterated excitement. He was becoming something new, something no one had ever seen before. And he was building it himself, one sticky, spectacular failure at a time. The initial, giddy euphoria of wall crawling and newfound strength had begun to curdle into a persistent, nagging frustration. Izuku Midoriya lay spread-eagled on the ceiling of his bedroom, the familiar posters of All Might's smiling face now an inverted landscape beneath him. The world looked different from up here, but he felt incomplete. He had methodically, obsessively, catalogued every new facet of his spider-born abilities in the crisp, new pages of his notebook. Strength, speed, agility, durability, the terrifying and indispensable spider sense. It was an arsenal beyond his wildest childhood dreams. Yet, it was a puzzle with a glaringly obvious piece missing. A spider without a web is just a predator. A hero, he reasoned, needed a tool for rescue, for restraint, for mobility. A web was not just an iconic part of the spider's identity. It was its most versatile and elegant creation. He had spent the better part of an hour trying to will it into existence. He'd focused on his wrists, the backs of his hands, even the tips of his fingers, searching for the slightest tingle, the faintest hint of a biological nozzle or a spinneret. He'd flexed his forearms, concentrated until his head ached, and produced nothing but a thin sheen of sweat. He had even, in a moment of scientific desperation, pressed his wrist against a piece of paper and squeezed, hoping for some kind of secretion. The result was a slightly damp spot on the paper and a profound sense of foolishness. He let out a long, frustrated sigh, his breath misting in the cool night air. It was definitive. The spider's gift, as transformative as it was, did not include organic webbing. He peeled himself off the ceiling, dropping the last few feet and landing on the floor in a silent, perfect crouch that his old, clumsy body could never have managed. The grace of the movement was a stark contrast to the clunky dead end his investigation had hit. He sat at his desk, the lamplight casting a small, warm circle in the darkness, and stared at the open page of his notebook. The list of abilities was impressive, a hero's dream sheet, but under the heading, Missing Abilities, he had written only 2 words, Web Generation. It felt like a cruel joke. He had been given the engine of a sports car but no wheels, the wings of a jet but no fuel. He could punch through walls and dodge bullets, but how was he supposed to save someone falling from a building? By jumping after them and hoping the landing didn't kill them both? How was he supposed to stop a getaway car without turning it into a crumpled wreck with a 15% Detroit smash? His gaze drifted from his notebook to the shelves that lined his walls. They were a testament to a lifetime of hero worship, filled with books, figures, and magazines. His eyes scanned the titles, the dynamic cover art, the schematics he had hand-copied of various heroes' support gear. He saw a diagram of Aizawa-sensei's capture weapon, its complex weave of steel wire alloy and carbon nanofibers. He saw a breakdown of Ciro's tape dispensing mechanisms, focusing on the combination of propellant and adhesive composition. He saw a feature on Mei Hatsum's myriad of inventions, her philosophy of using technology to bridge the gap between a quirk's potential and its practical application. And then it hit him. It wasn't a gentle dawning, but a full-blown, high-voltage epiphany, a lightning strike of pure, unadulterated clarity that seemed to light up every neuron in his supercharged brain. His thoughts, which had been a tangled mess of frustration, suddenly snapped into a straight, brilliant line. The answer wasn't in his biology. It wasn't in the spider's genetic gift. The answer was right here. In his own mind. If the body can't provide it, then the mind must. The thought was so sharp, so powerful, it felt like someone else had whispered it in his ear. He looked down at his own hands, the scarred, bruised hands of a fighter, but also the hands of a meticulous note-taker, a lifelong analyst. He had spent more than a decade breaking down the powers of others. Why had he never considered building one for himself? A frantic, exhilarating energy seized him, chasing away every last scrap of his frustration. This was a problem to be solved. This was the ultimate analysis project. He grabbed his pen, his knuckles white with a newfound purpose. He flipped to a clean page in Hero Analysis for My Quirks 14. And at the top, in bold, decisive letters, he wrote, Project Artificial Web Generation System, codename, Web Shooter. The world outside his desk lamp faded to black. His heightened senses, which had been an overwhelming distraction, now narrowed to a single point of focus: the paper, the pen, the problem. His mind, subtly but irrevocably altered by the spider's venom, began to work with an efficiency that was both thrilling and slightly terrifying. It was like upgrading from a dusty old desktop computer to a quantum supercomputer. Connections were made, data was cross-referenced, and solutions were rendered with astonishing speed. First, the delivery system. It had to be wrist-mounted for intuitive aiming. It had to be compact enough to fit under a costume sleeve, yet durable enough to withstand the incredible G-forces of swinging and the concussive feedback of using one for all. He began to sketch, his hand moving with a fluid confidence he'd never known. He designed a main bracelet component that would house the cartridge and trigger mechanism, with a reinforced polymer casing. The trigger was the most critical design challenge. A simple button on the side or top was out of the question. He might activate it by accident while punching, or while bracing for an impact. It needed to be deliberate, a motion he would never make unintentionally in a fight. He remembered watching a documentary about a hero with tactile telekinesis who activated his power by pressing specific fingers together. The principle was sound. He sketched a flat, twin-panel trigger plate that would sit in the center of his palm, flush with the glove of his costume. To activate it, he would need to make a specific gesture, pressing down on the plate with his middle and ring fingers, a quick, sharp double tap. It was a unique, unnatural motion, impossible to perform by accident when making a fist. Perfect. Next, the propellant. How to get the fluid from the cartridge to the nozzle with enough force to shoot 50 feet or more. He recalled Ciro's gear, which used a chemical reaction to generate pressure. Too complex, too volatile for a first prototype. He considered compressed air, but the canisters would be too bulky. Then he remembered his shopping trip for his failed prototype. The small, silver CO2 cartridges used for inflating bicycle tires or in seltzer bottles. They were compact, stable, and held an incredible amount of pressure. A simple piercing mechanism tied to the trigger could release a controlled burst. It was elegant, simple, and most importantly, achievable with parts he could actually buy. Finally, the most difficult piece of the puzzle, the web fluid itself. This was where his years of obsessive hero research paid off. He flipped through old notes, his mind pulling disparate pieces of information together. He knew that some capture weapons used a fast-acting epoxy, while others used a supercooled polymer. He needed something more versatile. It required 3 core properties. 1. Tensile strength. It had to be strong enough to support his own body weight, plus the momentum of swinging, plus potentially the weight of another person. It needed the strength of steel, but the weight of nylon. 2. Viscosity adhesion. It had to be a liquid in the pressurized cartridge, but solidify into an elastic solid almost instantly upon contact with air. It needed to be incredibly sticky, but only on one end. He couldn't have his own hands getting stuck to his webs. He theorized about electrostatic properties, a fluid that would polarize upon leaving the nozzle, making only the leading edge adhesive. 3. Transience. He couldn't go around gumming up the city with permanent webbing. That was property damage. It needed a built-in off switch. He hypothesized the chemical compound that would cause the long-chain polymers to break down after a set period, perhaps 1 or 2 hours, causing the web to dissolve into a fine, biodegradable dust. He began scribbling frantic chemical formulas, a chaotic mix of high school chemistry and advanced concepts he'd gleaned from scientific journals online. He wrote down names like polyisoprene, nylon 6, cross-linked shear thickening polymers. He didn't understand all of it, not perfectly, but his new brain filled in the gaps, making intuitive leaps that felt like flashes of genius. He settled on a base formula, a complex slurry of chemicals that, in theory, would meet all his requirements. He worked through the night, filling a dozen pages with intricate schematics, chemical equations, and logistical plans. The sun began to rise, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, before he finally put his pen down. He looked at his work, a complete, comprehensive blueprint for his own support gear. A deep, profound sense of accomplishment washed over him. He wasn't just a boy who had stumbled into power. He was an architect. The blueprints were one thing. Building them was another. His disastrous first prototype, with its leaky nozzle and jammed valve, was a testament to his lack of proper tools and materials. His scavenged parts were too crude. The plastic casings he tried to melt into shape were weak and brittle. The nozzle, which he had tried to drill by hand, was imprecise, causing the web fluid to spray in a wide, useless cone. To make the devices he had just designed, he needed precision. He needed tools he didn't have. He needed a microlathe to machine a proper nozzle. He needed a 3D printer to fabricate the complex internal parts of the trigger mechanism. He knew of only one place that had that kind of equipment. A place that was a chaotic wonderland of technological marvels. A place that was strictly off-limits to students without supervision. The UA Support Course Workshop. The idea was insane. It was reckless. Sneaking into a school building after hours was grounds for suspension, maybe even expulsion. It would be an unforgivable betrayal of the trust UA had placed in him. But the alternative, to have this brilliant, perfect design trapped on paper, to be a hero operating at a fraction of his potential, was unthinkable. The hum of the spider in his blood seemed to agree. It was a low, steady thrum of encouragement, an instinct that told him this was a risk worth taking. 2 nights later, under the sliver of a crescent moon, he put his plan into action. He dressed in a black sweatsuit, his face obscured by a dark hoodie. He felt less like a hero in training and more like a cat burglar. He slipped out of his apartment, his movements utterly silent, and made his way to the UA campus. Getting over the main security wall was laughably easy. While the gates and sensors were formidable, the sheer concrete expanse of the perimeter wall was just another surface to him now. He pressed his hands and feet to the cool stone and simply walked up it, a silent, shadowy insect defying gravity and the multi-million yen security system. He dropped down on the other side into the manicured campus grounds, the familiar school buildings looking strange and imposing in the moonlight. The support department building, Workshop 7 was a squat, utilitarian structure attached to the main engineering block. Its windows were dark, its doors securely locked. He circled it, his heightened senses on full alert. He could hear the low, electric hum of machines in sleep mode, smell the faint, lingering scent of solder and ozone. He found a maintenance window on the second floor, slightly ajar to allow for ventilation. It was his way in. He didn't need a ladder. He crawled up the brick facade as easily as he crawled his own bedroom wall, his fingers and toes finding purchase in the microscopic imperfections of the mortar. He slipped through the narrow opening, his spider-enhanced agility allowing him to contort his body in ways that should have been impossible. He landed inside in a perfect, silent crouch. He was in. He found himself in a storage closet. He pushed the door open and stepped into the main workshop. His breath caught in his throat. It was a tinkerer's paradise. Workbenches were littered with half-finished inventions, exposed circuitry, and blueprints for devices he couldn't begin to comprehend. Tools of every conceivable size and function hung from pegboards on the walls. In the center of the room, gleaming under the faint moonlight filtering through the high windows, were the machines he had come for. A state-of-the-art digital lathe and a series of large, industrial-grade 3D printers. It was May Hatsum's chaotic kingdom, and he was trespassing in the heart of it. A discarded pair of her signature goggles lay on a workbench next to a device that looked suspiciously like a jet-propelled toaster. He could almost feel her manic, creative energy in the air. He couldn't afford to waste time. He had brought his most promising web fluid formula in a small, sealed flask, and a USB stick with the 3D printing files for his internal components. He went to work, his movements swift and efficient. The machines were complex, but the interfaces were surprisingly intuitive. He booted up the 3D printer, loaded his files, and set it to work fabricating the delicate trigger plates and valve housings from a high-density carbon polymer. The machine whirred to life, its movements precise and hypnotic. While it printed, he moved to the microlathe. This was the most crucial part. The nozzle had to be perfect. It needed a main aperture of exactly 0.8 millimeters, with a series of smaller, electrostatically charged grooves on the inside to polarize the fluid as it exited. He loaded a small block of titanium alloy he had borrowed from the workshop's raw material stores and began to machine it, his eyes glued to the digital display. He was completely absorbed, his world narrowed to the microscopic point where the lathe's tool met the spinning metal. The hum of the machine was the only sound in the universe. The low-level buzz of his spider sense was a calm, steady rhythm, an ambient hum that told him the area was secure. And then it spiked. It wasn't a gentle nudge. It was a piercing, ice-cold shriek of alarm that shot through his skull. Danger. Close. Imminent. His head snapped up, his heart instantly hammering against his ribs. He killed the power to the lathe, plunging his corner of the workshop into darkness. He scanned the room, his eyes piercing the gloom. He saw nothing. He heard nothing. But the spider sense was screaming, a relentless, frantic alarm. Then he heard it. A faint clatter from the hallway, followed by a familiar, high-energy voice muttering to itself. Stupid, stupid, stupid! Baby 112, you get back here this instant! Your gyroscopic stabilizers are completely uncalibrated. You'll take someone's eye out, Hatsum-san. Panic, cold and absolute, seized him. There was nowhere to run. The main door was the only way out, and she was right outside. The window was too far away. He was trapped. A sliver of light appeared under the main door, followed by the beep and hiss of a keycard lock disengaging. The door swung open. Instinct, pure and unthinking, took over. He didn't climb. He leaped. A single, desperate, silent bound propelled him straight up. His fingers and toes clamped onto the cold metal of a massive overhead ventilation duct just as May Hatsum, her pink hair a chaotic mess and her goggles askew, stumbled into the room. He clung to the ceiling, his body flattened against the ductwork, his heart trying to beat its way out of his chest. He was completely exposed. If she looked up, she would see him. He held his breath, forcing his body to remain perfectly still. May didn't look up. Her attention was entirely focused on a small, chrome-plated drone that was skittering across the floor, trailing sparks. Oh, no you don't! She cried, diving for it. The drone expertly dodged her and zipped under a large workbench. Aha! Playing hard to get, are we? I built you with heat-seeking sensors, my pretty! You can't hide from your mommy. She crawled under the workbench after it, her voice echoing slightly in the large room. Honestly, Power Loader has no appreciation for true autonomy. He calls it a glitch, I call it emergent personality. We'll see who's laughing when my babies are delivering packages on the moon. From his inverted perch, Izuku watched the bizarre, one-sided chase. He could see the top of her head, the frantic movements of her legs. Every muscle in his body screamed with the strain of holding his position. His adhesive grip was strong, but the fear of making a noise, of a single drop of sweat falling and giving him away, was agonizing. The spider sense was still buzzing, a lower-level warning now, a constant reminder of the active threat just feet below him. After what felt like an eternity, May emerged from under the table, holding the now deactivated drone triumphantly. Gotcha! Back to the diagnostic bench for you. She stood up, brushing dust from her jumpsuit. She surveyed her messy workshop, a proud, maternal smile on her face. For one heart-stopping moment, her gaze drifted upwards, sweeping across the ceiling. Izuku's blood turned to ice. He was sure he was caught, but her eyes slid right past his shadowy form, not registering the human-shaped anomaly clinging to her ductwork. She yawned, stretched, and headed for the door. Okay, that's enough excitement for one night, she said to her captive drone. Time for a nice, long recharge cycle. For both of us. The door hissed shut behind her, plunging the workshop back into darkness and silence. Izuku didn't move for a full minute. He remained frozen on the ceiling, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against the cold metal of the duct. The spider sense slowly receded from a sharp alarm back to its ambient hum. The danger had passed. He let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding, a long, shaky exhalation. That had been too close. Far too close. The recklessness of his actions crashed down on him. He had almost thrown everything away. His future at UA, All Might's legacy, everything, for a tiny, machined piece of metal. He dropped silently to the floor, his legs trembling. He quickly gathered his newly printed components from the 3D printer and grabbed the perfectly finished nozzle from the lathe. He didn't dare turn the machines back on. He had what he came for. He slipped back to the window, out into the cool night air, and didn't stop moving until he was safely back in his own bedroom. The door locked behind him. He leaned against the door, the precious, high-tech components clutched in his hand, and allowed himself a moment to tremble. The risk had been immense, but the reward was everything. The next night, he assembled his new prototypes. They were a world away from his first clunky bracer. These were sleek, compact, and functional. The carbon polymer casing was lightweight but incredibly strong. The internal mechanisms, now 3D printed to his exact specifications, fit together with a satisfying click. The new titanium nozzle gleamed under his desk lamp. He loaded the refined web fluid and a fresh CO2 cartridge into the main chamber. They were ready. He strapped one of the devices to his right wrist. It felt solid, balanced, an extension of his own arm. He stood in the middle of his room, the same spot where his disastrous first test had taken place. The sticky remnants of that failure were still faintly visible on the wall, a reminder of how far he had come in a few short days. He took a deep, steadying breath, his heart pounding not with fear, but with a giddy, electric anticipation. He raised his arm, his fingers extending in the now-practiced gesture. He aimed at the All Might poster on the far wall, a silent apology to his hero for the repeated defacement. He flexed his middle and ring fingers, double-tapping the trigger plate in his palm. Thwip. The sound was perfect. A sharp, compressed hiss. A thin, impossibly strong line of silvery white webbing shot across the room with pinpoint accuracy and stuck to the poster with a firm splat. The line was taut, with no sag, no drip. It shimmered in the lamplight, a perfect, beautiful creation. A huge, unrestrained grin spread across his face. He had done it. He had actually done it. It was real. He tugged on the line. It was as strong as steel cable. He gave it a harder pull, putting his full, spider-enhanced weight into it. The web line held firm, but the poster ripped away from the wall, A small square of All Might's face now stuck to the end of his creation. It was glorious. Filled with a surge of triumphant confidence, he aimed at his desk chair and prepared to fire again, imagining himself yanking a weapon from a villain's hand. He tapped the trigger, perhaps a bit too enthusiastically. This time, the sound was wrong. Instead of a crisp thwip, it was a choked, gurgling thump. He had forgotten to check the seals on the secondary pressure valve after his hasty escape from the workshop. The recoil from the first shot had knocked it loose. The entire CO2 cartridge discharged at once, flash venting its contents and emptying the entire reservoir of web fluid in a single, massive, uncontrolled burst. A huge, sticky wad of webbing, the size of a pillow, erupted from the shooter. It flew across the room and slammed into his desk with a wet, heavy splat, engulfing his notebooks, his laptop, and half his hero figure collection in a thick, rapidly hardening cocoon of white goo. Webbing dripped from the desk onto the chair and pooled on the floor. It was an absolute, unmitigated disaster. Izuku stood frozen, his arm outstretched, the now empty shooter smoking faintly. He stared at the catastrophic mess, at his precious analysis notebooks sealed in a webby tomb. He looked at the single, perfect web line still dangling from the ceiling, and then at the gooey apocalypse that had been his workspace. He stood there for a second, the silence of the room broken only by the soft, dripping sound of liquid webbing. Then, he started to laugh. It was a quiet, breathless, slightly unhinged laugh, the laugh of a boy in way over his head. It was the laugh of an inventor whose magnificent creation had just spectacularly blown up in his face. It was the laugh of a hero who had just taken his first, messy, chaotic, and absolutely wonderful step into a larger world. He was covered in his own secret, but for the first time, it didn't feel like a burden. It felt like a beginning.